Okay, now we're ready. Our final presentation this afternoon is Dan Ward, who's a member of NOVAC and a longtime astrophotographer. He's one of Zach Panitsky and my co-workers at MITRE, and he's been an advocate at MITRE for knowledge about the eclipse. He's been pushing hard to make sure that people in the community understand what's going to be available to them if they look both at the partial phases in the area of Northern Virginia and also if they travel to the total eclipse. Dan is one of those people who, as Mike Reynolds described in his keynote, took a camera and a small telescope when he was young and put them together and began astrophotography just by doing it. And he's been just doing it ever since and learned a lot more about what's right, what's wrong, what works, what doesn't work. And how many eclipses have you been to?
11.
11 eclipses. So he's got a lot of experience to explain to us about what works and what doesn't work in total solar eclipse photography. So with that, I'll introduce Dan Ward.
Thanks. So hopefully you can learn from my mistakes so you can make fresh ones. All right, did I hit the... first thing I want to hit that several people have hit is don't do anything stupid. You know, it's only safe to look at the sun without a filter during totality. Otherwise, we should be using a filter. And some of us do cheat a few seconds on either side, but basically, you know, there's some great stuff. NASA website has everything you want to know from a technical perspective. You're going to find my presentation considerably less technical than George's was, because I'm really talking about the basics of doing some, how to capture some. I also want to say is we shouldn't be taking pictures during the eclipse, especially if it's your first eclipse. How many people are not going to take any pictures during the eclipse? All right, good. Well, otherwise, I'm going to say for those of you who are going to take pictures anyway, try to give you some simple tips so you can capture some decent images, but primarily you want to be looking at the eclipse. So a little bit about what you will see, and I'll skip over some of my material because some of it has already been covered by Mike much better than I could. I do want to point out the young lady that is up there on the cruise boat on the eclipse. If you notice, she loves to point out the fact that she's red as a lobster because she didn't think about sunscreen during a total eclipse. It's August, it's, you know, sunscreen, good idea. That's Kate Russo, by the way. Dr. Russo is a professional eclipse chaser who happens to be a clinical psychologist. She's done 3 books about the psychology of chasing eclipses. The most recent one was just published about 6 weeks ago called Being in the Shadow. A lot of fun, interesting stuff about how emotional people get during a totality. And by the way, the latest issue of Wired magazine features an article about Kate. So, but this is, I think, the same picture you have from Luke. I mean, this is what it's all about. This is what we want to see. I heard somebody say the other day that the difference between seeing a total eclipse and seeing a partial eclipse is like the difference between looking at a photograph of nice chocolate and having the best chocolate dessert of your life. So as Mike Reynolds said, get to totality if it's at all possible. If you can drag yourself to there, you don't want to miss it. There's no comparison. Partial phases are cool, and you can get some interesting photos. Of course, this will be with eclipses. This particular one is from 98, the Aruba eclipse. One of the cool things about all these eclipses is you get quite a collection of T-shirts. One of the bad things about it is they seem to shrink over time. I don't know. Have you figured this out, Mike? You've seen more than I have, but you know, it's kind of cool. Now Aruba. We went to Aruba right down here. I went with the Boston ATM Club. About 100 of us flew down there from Boston, and you know, there was supposed to be about a 15% probability of clouds. And it was raining 2 hours before the eclipse. Yeah, so we actually came up with some colorful language. So yeah, the maps and the projections are good, but really what's critical is the day of the eclipse. But it did clear up about half an hour, and there were sucker holes, and I was able to get some good photos. These photos are from a Russian, and I won't try to pronounce his name and humiliate myself in front of the room. But basically, this is with a Canon PowerShot G5. Not a super sophisticated camera. And basically what he was, the 38 series, roughly 3 minutes between each exposure, a filter in front of the camera during the partial phase is taken off during totality. you can get some pretty cool stuff if you look ahead of time, figure out where the angles are going to be, and get the diagonal. So, you know, you can do some fairly fun images without actually driving yourself totally crazy. And the cameras, like most modern cameras, more sophisticated cameras, have intervalometers on them, so you can set it up for an automatic exposure, as Mike talked about his really cool cruise ship photos. I won't spend a lot of time. This map was actually across there. This group knows all about that, so I'll just skip ahead here. I have pointed out to several people, because I've given this talk to a number of photography clubs in Northern Virginia, that the closest totality from Northern Virginia is roughly Lake Marion, well, within this bend, South Carolina. I think the people from FEMA are now saying the mother of all traffic jams is very likely on Monday, August 21st for multiple locations. But still, it's, you know, that's what, about a 7-hour drive from Washington, so you really ought to go there, somewhere within totality band. I won't say who he is because I would never want to embarrass Bob Parks in front of the club, but he was talking about having plane reservations for 4 different locations for Sunday night, and then canceling the 3 he doesn't need. I did suggest that perhaps Bob is now on Homeland Security's watch list. 4 reservations on the same name on the same day, same time. But it's not a bad idea. Yeah. And again, I'll skip over some of this because Mike already covered it. But the contingency plans. This was in Aruba on the beach. Now we're almost at totality, and the clouds rolled in again. Now they rolled right through, but there was a part of the group that totally panicked. They jumped in their cars because they were convinced that this part of Aruba would be better than this part of Aruba because the clouds were here. They managed to stay under the clouds the entire way. We had a wonderful eclipse on the beach. You probably know stories like that too, don't you? Uh-oh, okay, here we go. Cloud cover, you already covered that one. Take some friends along. Maybe you don't need 100 people. But again, the advice is enjoy the eclipse. Don't be fidgeting with your camera settings during totality. Lots of camera options. Yes, it is theoretically possible to hold your camera up to the eyepiece of binoculars or a telescope and take a photo. I've yet to see anybody do it successfully for a really good eclipse photo, but it is theoretically possible. But there are also, you know, little brackets like this if you want to use your iPhone. And actually, TeleView makes a very nice device that fits onto a TeleView eyepiece, and Orion, some others. You know, you can go with very simple equipment. You don't need a lot of technology for an eclipse. You need a filter for the partial phases, and you know. So I guess because this is an astronomy group, I won't explain piggyback and the afocal because I think this group all well knows this. But I like keeping it simple. This is Alan Dyer just released a wonderful book on eclipse photography. It's an EPUB iPhone book, iBook. It's 300 pages, everything you ever wanted to know about eclipse photography, eclipse videography, $9.99. It's hard to beat it. Incredibly comprehensive. Alan gave me permission to use this. I think this was Turkey, but basically he's holding a filter so he can get the partial sun with this wonderful environment. I mean, that's a very simple but a very cool photograph and something you would remember. So however you want to capture it, and I think you guys have the perfect team because you're getting the people and you're getting the eclipse. It's nice. I have lots of photos of the eclipse, various eclipses. I wish I had more photo of friends and family around because it's that immersion of the experience that is so remarkable. Now, just something about scaling, because people that haven't been to one before want to think about what kind of equipment do you need. This is from Fred Espinock's website, showing the size based on the focal length of your lens. So I love my C8. I used it for an annular eclipse where you don't have the corona. There were some problems associated with that on internal reflections, but back in those days I was using Mylar filters and they tended to add more internal reflections than some of the modern filters do. But my favorite is 500 to say 800 millimeter. I just like that scale for eclipses, but it's personal preference. Yes?
Just to clarify to people, that's that focal length for full size.
Yeah, the black is full size. And the blue is what it would be with your typical crop DSLR. Fred usually uses a glass Thousand Oaks filter. I don't think he's changed from that. Have you heard? I have used both. I have one of the older Thousand Oaks. Actually, I have some more on filters in a couple of minutes, so I'll hold that. 300 millimeter is actually a very nice focal length for an Eclipse. You have lots of room for Corona, interesting things. So I do. What I shot in Aruba was a 300 millimeter piggybacked on a 500 millimeter a Teleview Pronto, and it was kind of a nice combination. That was in the bad old day of films. I was shooting Kodachrome 64 through the Pronto and Ectar 50 through the 300. And I'm not going to read all of these, but test the optics. Mike was talking about how important it is. You can test for internal reflections with the crescent moon or the Venus. That will tell you whether or not you're getting in. Some of the compound zoom lenses do have a lot of reflections that you don't normally see when you're shooting the puppy dog or the kid next door because they're not all that bright. I mean, they might be bright, but not as bright as the sun. Yeah? But try to test things out and look to see what's working for you. But you don't want the ghosting. My annular eclipse, I had to do a lot of editing after the fact to get rid of all the internal reflections. Okay. I do briefly like to say that a lot of people think that you need to shoot at the smallest f-stop because that's the greatest depth of field. Reality is you've got one object that's 280,000 miles away, another one that's 93 million miles away. Depth of field is not really going to be much of a factor in that. So look for the setting on your camera that is the sharpest area. If for most cameras, that's somewhere in the 5, 6 to 11, the sharpest component of your lens. Now, if you have to have a smaller f-stop because of the brightness, that's fine. But if you're looking for maximum sharpness of a camera lens, then it's going to be somewhere in that sweet spot. And you can usually find that by looking at the technical details on lens as well. Focusing on the edge. By the way, there is a camera focusing lever that is sold. Some of the camera stores sell those. I've seen them for $19.99. I've seen them for $29.99. I found one at a dollar store for $1 because it's a jar wrench. So you can spend as much as you want to, Unfortunately, I found the one at the dollar store after I already bought one for $19.95. But I do recommend manual focus. You can use autofocus initially, but the manual focus will help you fine-tune it. I put gaffer's tape to lock it in place, but I do check my manual. Since we're doing digital these days, I do check it just in case. It is theoretically possible, especially in August, that you'll get some expansion of your lens, and you could get a little bit of shift. If I'm going to the trouble, I want to get it as sharp as I can get it. Anything to add on that?
No, you nailed it. This
All
is
right.
the biggest weakness is people just don't get the sharpest focus, just like a ash photography. Nail this, you nail it.
That's right. And if you are using a zoom lens, some zoom lenses, especially when they get hot, the lens can creep. So you want to make the gaffer's tape doesn't stick. Masking tape works similarly. I wouldn't use duct tape. Yeah.
There's a trade-off between getting the focus at the last possible minute, because it's the sharpest, and also the way your hand starts twitching in those minutes before. What is the latest, for example, that you use to tweak the?
I don't touch focus within 5 minutes. Like you say, I'm beginning the adrenaline's pumping, and I just don't want to muck it up at the last minute. Yeah.
Would you use a batten-off mask to do that?
I haven't tried a batten-off mask for this. I have used Hartmann mask, which actually I have a photo of a simple version of that later. But I have used masks to get I haven't tried the batten-off on that. I thought batten-off was better for point sources, but I'm not sure. Okay. All right. Live view is good. I use a right angle viewer. And this is Hartmann mask actually has 3 holes. Schneider has 2 holes. That's a very expensive focusing mask made out of a piece of cardboard and cutting 2 circles in it. The idea is just like in the old style, in the old film days or viewfinders where you had a split range finder, you converge the image. When you look at something with the holes like that, you will have multiple images and you get your sharpest focus when you converge the images. It's a nice focusing tool that doesn't cost you very much. Of course, with the if you use live view or if you're sending your camera to your laptop or your iPad or whatever, you can zoom in and tweak the focus there. But again, if you're going to the trouble to take these photos, it's kind of nice if they're in focus. Okay. If that's for me, I'm tied up. Is reducing the sun image blur, and you talked a little bit about this as well. Use a sturdy tripod and don't extend it to the maximum height because that's going to get you some vibration. I like to hang weight on my tripod. I usually actually hang a camera bag on mine. This guy just used water bottles. But it gives you some, I've seen people actually use tent stakes to stake their tripods down. You just don't want a lot of vibration. If you're on a hard surface, vibration pads are a very good idea. If you're in grass or soil, I don't think that matters as much. Of course, using a remote shutter, wireless or wired remote shutter, will keep your hand away from the camera when you're taking the images. You can use a shutter timer, but that does limit the number of exposures you can get because you'll be waiting for the shutter timer. Intervalometer or the timing software and mirror lockup, all these, if your camera has these functions, that reduces some of the vibration that normally can happen when you're taking a photo. Anything you can do to avoid that. The motion blur, do you have to have a tracking device for the sun? It depends on the focal length that you're using. And the old rule of thumb is if you divide your focal length into 500, that will tell you the fastest shutter speed you can use before the motion of the sun and the moon will blur the image. So for example, a 200 millimeter lens, you can take up to 2.5 seconds. And an 800 millimeter lens, 0.625 seconds. This is something I would test out with the moon beforehand to make sure with your optical setup what works well with your camera. I use a tracking device, but I have shot just using tripods before, using the slower speeds. It doesn't mean it means you can't get some of the longer exposures that we saw where you can get the outer corona. And test it. Now, when I went to Aruba, that was my first total solar eclipse. I was living in Connecticut at the time, and as I was gearing up for it, every Saturday I would set up my gear in my front yard in the snow in Connecticut, of course, that time of year, and I would test because I was piggybacking the 300 millimeter lens on the Pronto. And in those days, we didn't have shutter lockup, so I was rotating the exposures. Now, I had a lot of friends that had gone to totality and they had eclipse rapture, where basically you get so overwhelmed by seeing this that you kind of lose track of what you're doing. So my concept was to get muscle memory. I would practice this so much that it would be instinctive. I could take the pictures and I could look at the eclipse. I practiced. I also built a bracket to hold the 300 millimeter on top of my Pronto. I made it out of a foam material. In Connecticut, standing in the snow at 18, 20 degrees, it worked like a charm. In Aruba, having stood on a beach where it was 90 plus degrees for several hours, when I pulled the filters off, the foam had melted. At totality, my 300 millimeter is suddenly trying to take a picture of the beach. And so I'm standing there looking at this camera, this well-rehearsed practice that couldn't possibly anything go wrong. It's looking at the beach, and I'm, in deference to what George was talking about earlier, I'm saying, what the fluxosphere? And I realize, okay, I've just wasted like 7 seconds staring at my camera, So what do? You shoot the one that's I ignore the camera that's DOA. And basically, I got some decent photos. I didn't get the photos I had anticipated, but I spent more time looking at the eclipse. And by the way, had a pair of Fujinon 15 by 70 binoculars with the solar filters. And looking, the like 5-second look through those binoculars, that's the most amazing view I've ever seen of an eclipse. Have you? Yeah. All right. Now, some people say this is the only slide I have in my presentation that's worth seeing, so I hope that's not the case, but I tried 5 different solar filters. I used a 300 millimeter lens, the same one that I had that gave me the trouble on the beach. But shooting at f8 and ISO 100, I tried 5 different filters. The Thousand Oaks glass, black polymer, which is a Thousand Oaks, it has been replaced now by the silver polymer. RG Solar, which Thousand Oaks actually has discontinued. It was 2 sheets, and it was actually it was a pretty good filter. The Helios, which I think is actually fairly close to. I think this and the silver poly are actually pretty good, but again, I didn't try the silver poly. That came out after I did this test. And the Baader. Baader is my personal favorite because that's really the color of the sun. But these are the colors everybody expects the sun to be. So a lot of people really prefer these. I guess Fred usually shoots this.
It's the most expensive,
Yeah.
believe it or not.
Yeah.
It's
And if you're really using higher resolution stuff, then I think you get the cleaner resolution with the Baader. I use the Baader. Actually, I have the ND38 Baader also with their whatchamacallit filter. Yeah, but it's photographic only. Same, Thousand Oaks used to make a photographic only glass filter that was ND38. Most of these solar filters, almost all of them are ND5, neutral density 5. And Thousand Oaks actually stopped selling theirs. Yeah, and Thousand Oaks no longer sells theirs. Baader comes from Germany, so I guess it's hard to find. But the other side works fine. But at least this will tell you something about the brightness of the image using the same identical setup on all 5. You can see a little bit about how much light you lose with the poly. Obviously, you can adjust your settings and bring this up so that it looks more like this or even that. But I wanted a pure shot that shows side by side what the different filters do. Okay. Because I often yes.
Excuse me, just jumping a little because it is a photography, but folks haven't mentioned this, but are the welder's glasses 12 or 14 as certified as the filters?
I know the 14s are considered safe. I don't think the 12s are considered safe.
14, so
Yeah, the 14s are. And the 14s are pretty cool for looking at it. I actually carry one around in my car year round because I look for naked eye sunspots. But I have tried to shoot through a welder's filter, and I did not find it was it's not really made for optical quality. And it's also a green image. I do like to at least make some reference to H-alpha, solar continuum, and calcium filters, because some people they've read somewhere that this is what you should use for eclipse, and I say it's kind of cool to have the H-alpha to know where the prominences may be, but it's not for sure not in totality, and they're very expensive filters actually. So I just told my photography friends, be aware for them, but you don't want them for this event. They're very specialized. Although, and you had a similar, Chris Schur is old observing buddy from when I lived in Arizona, and he's really done some pretty amazing things. But it is pretty cool when you can see some of this. I do plan to take an H-alpha filter as part of my gear for doing the partial phases, in case there's something really interesting going on the sun. It will make for better photos. And if they're not, I'll just switch to the white filter and use that on both cameras. It is fun when you do have sunspots. This was Nag's Head, October 2004. So just a partial eclipse there, but there was a great sunspot grouping, one of the best ones we've had in the last few years. And so a partial eclipse, and that's the good news, is if you get the solar filters, you can use them for the partial eclipses. Our next total eclipse is 2024, but I think I have a list later. They have a lot of partials. One of my buddies at work, another colleague here, he's trying to get set up. Okay, so he's using a C5. He's using an Orion 80 millimeter, all kinds of cool stuff. And I was very impressed with the Explorer Scientific. that the setup they have. I think what a wonderful setup for somebody who wants to take fairly serious ones. Matter of fact, I even heard a very prominent Eclipse guy actually bought that.
Yeah, that's what I'm using. This guy.
And the other night when we had the nice rainstorm, my setup took a tumble. My scope is fine. I will be using a Teleview 102 and a Teleview 85 as my Eclipse instruments. But my old Safari, Orion Safari, which has been very reliable for this kind of stuff, it's not quite working right. It's got some sounds in it ever since the tumble. So I actually have one of those on order. I said, if it's good enough for Mike Reynolds, I mean, who am I to argue with it? The expert. So I've actually ordered the same mount. Now, totality exposures, this is a thousandth of a second. That's 2 seconds. And those particular ones are, Kodachrome scans and not particularly nice resolution, but the amount of time that you expose determines a lot on what you'll see. These are 2 of the exposures that I got in Aruba. Now, some other guy also shot Aruba and got slightly better image than I did. This is Fred, and this is 20 stacked images. And this is in the bad old day of film when stacked images actually was darkroom, not Photoshop. But, you can see just a couple of exposures because I was manually doing everything versus the ability to automate and get a full range of exposures. It will give you a lot of capability. My 10-year-old daughter didn't have quite the same luck with totality, but actually I think this is pretty cool, and she's turned into an artist, so I think this was just an early experiment in abstract art. Not too bad. Here, I don't know if you can see it from the back, but there's dual image here. This is ghosting. And of course, the guy behind me at Aruba, who had wonderful equipment and was telling everybody else what to do, he left his filter on, and I could hear him doing click, 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 36 shots, and they all look like that one. But, it is also amazing to me of what people bring to an eclipse, like the family that was, decided that 3 minutes before totality was when to have the knockdown drag out fight about the babysitter. And everybody else is just like, just shut up, we're trying to see the eclipse. Yeah. So, it's amazing what could happen. Be prepared as best you can.
Did you have a reptile experience?
The what?
Did you have a reptile experience?
We had lots of lizards running through, but I have heard of people having snakes join them prior to totality. But I have no personal experience with that. I do say, hey, don't go nuts about it. Enjoy the eclipse. Capture some images, sure. But, this is probably going to be the most documented eclipse in history thus far. So, you can actually pick up what Mike posts on the web and claim that they're your photos, and nobody will know the difference. Yes?
So would you just suggest, you've never shot an eclipse or anything, just you got like a 14mm wide angle, just setting that up, just click away while actually watching it?
Yeah, I'm actually planning on doing kind of 2 years ago, I started planning a Ward family reunion in the Nashville area around the eclipse because the wards are scattered all over the country. I thought that was a nice central location. I know it's not the optimal location for clouds, but I thought pretty good probability of clearness. So I do want to have a video that's capturing the 10 minutes either side or so around totality. And some wide angle shots. So I will have a couple of cameras set up just capturing stuff like that. But then, those are set them up, turn them on, and then forget about them. And I think that's a good way to do it, actually. Fred has done 3 lectures now for Sky and Telescope, which they're webinars that you can download from Sky and Telescope. They're like $29 a piece. Do you have anything that you've published on?
The August issue of Sharpness article.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great issue. The August issue of Astronomy. Sky and Telescope did a special issue that you don't get as a subscriber. You have to actually buy it separately. That also is dedicated to that. Some great articles. And Fred, in his early stuff, was saying bracket your shutter speeds between 1,000th to 1 second or longer, depending if you're tracking or not. But do practice.
Dan,
Yeah.
in a range like that,
I was basically working through the shutter on the camera, so 1,000, 500, 250, 125. What has been your experience?
I actually started with exposure as fast as 8,000 per
Yeah.
second, and ISO of 100. I like shooting 100
Mhm.
ISO. Fred and I differ a bit there, but I like that slow ISO. I just think everything, well, the advantages of slow ISO.
Yeah.
That's just me.
And I'm with you. I prefer the slow ISO as well. Yeah. Yeah.
That's not what I do too.
And I would say that, 3 hours from first contact to fourth contact, it may not be as thrilling to everybody that's with you. That's my 10-year-old and my 6-year-old in Aruba. So I looked for ways to keep them entertained. And as you were talking about earlier, I had Liz take a pencil and a piece of cardboard and write Aruba. Just poke the holes out. And so, I don't know if you can tell from the back, but you have this nice crescent sun projections from that. And then the leaves giving you that. So there's some cool things like that. Get the kids engaged in that other stuff because, they're not going to be quite as thrilled by the experiences, perhaps the adults. And your cousin Bob, of course, won't care about it at all. So we do have 24 solar eclipses in the next 11 years somewhere in the world, but not all. Most of them are not total. We have 6 partials visible from North America, from the Northern Virginia area, and so this is a list of those. The next total will be in the United States, going up through the Northeast. The company that Alan and Zach and I work for, we have multiple locations. We have one location that's 11 miles outside the band of totality of this eclipse, and they're 9 miles outside the band of the next eclipse, and we're thinking, what did they do wrong, I mean, but hey. I will seriously consider going to the annular eclipse. The annular eclipse is very cool. It's not anywhere near as cool as total, but it is a fun experience. And once you have the filters, hey, you got the gear anyway, why not use it? Yeah. Okay. A lot of resources I've listed here, and I think you actually have some copies of this book, your book, which is really wonderful. I also mentioned the Alan Dyer book is the online book, which is very cool. Yeah. And Fred Espinock and Jay Anderson have been publishing stuff forever, I guess 30 plus years. I'm not sure if we post these later. Just kind of the parting shot, these are the details that Luke had on that particular shot, which a lot of people picked up because he's been very kind to share it with folks. But he was shooting ISO 400 with f10 focal length. And this shows the exposures he was using for different parts of the image. So Fred has a table somewhat similar to this, but I think Luke kind of laid it out a little bit more cleanly on one slide. And I think that's it. I did close with the eye safety, but I'll leave this one up. So questions?
So most of us know how to polar align when the sky is dark. How do you get a tutorial for not polar align when you set?
So the question is how to get polar aligned
Right.
during the daytime, basically.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, for those of us that don't want to be there the night before.
Yeah, what I have used, some of them is an inclinometer to get the angle right, and a compass, and just looking for the magnetic offset, and just, And the good news is if you're shooting 300 millimeter to 800 millimeter, it's not like you're trying to get a astrophoto of a very small dark sky object. There's a lot of slop within the tracking there, so you can tweak the tracking periodically. Hasn't been much of a problem, mostly shooting 300 to 800 millimeter for me.
That would be why I agree.
Yeah.
And I'd comment, one of the major reasons to have it on some sort of a tracking mount is so that you're not fidgeting and trying to get the sun in the center of the field of view during totality. You can get it roughly going and know that you're in the neighborhood. It's one of the things you don't have to worry about.
Right. There's a Eclipse software called Eclipse Orchestrator. I have purchased it. I will admit, I am an economist. I've done a lot of simulation modeling. I'm finding it hard to learn how to use, honestly. Eclipse Maestro is that's the Apple, isn't it? And actually, I've heard several people say that it's a lot simpler and easier to use. So, but basically, with these automated software, you can set your prearranged series of exposures. Where with an intervalometer, you're basically going to have the same exposure over and over. With one of these Eclipse software packages, you can have that run that goes from 8,000th of a second to 8 seconds or whatever combination you want, just sequencing one right after the other. And you can run several cycles in 2.5 minutes, as opposed to if you're manually adjusting your camera, you're introducing vibration and you're missing looking at the eclipse, which is what you want to be doing in the first place. Other questions? Okay.
I'll make one comment that nobody happened to mention, I think except Mike briefly, about shadow bands.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something which is a unique eclipse phenomenon as you approach second contact and right after third contact, when the sliver of the sun is going through the turbulent atmosphere and creating waves on the ground, which are like the waves at the bottom of a swimming pool. And if you have a uniform surface, especially perpendicular to the direction to the sun, you may see it. They're very hard, and people waste a lot of time trying to photograph them. You probably shouldn't even try, because it's really hard to do, and you can't do it with the same settings that you're going to use on the sun, and you're looking away from the sun. So look at the eclipse.
I've never been able to see them myself. I do know people who've spread a white sheet out, and they just put video onto the white sheet, and they claim to have captured it. Your photo was pretty incredible. I've just. Yeah.
It depends on your altitude. It depends on the elevation of the sun. It's all kinds of craziness, but you may see it. The other thing which I had the good fortune to see once, that eclipse in Oaxaca, I was at 10,000 feet, and I could see the eclipse, if I remember right, receding through the valley as it left, and that was really dramatic. But it's very hard to be in a place where you're going to have a good view of the sun, and you're also going to have a view of the valley. So get a good place for the sun and forget about the others.
Yes.
Quick comment regarding the shadow bands. I did see them once. That was in Romania in '99. And what I did was I set my watch, which has multiple alarms, which I'm very happy about. I set it to be to alarm, I think, 2 minutes before totality, and 1 minute before totality. And I looked at 2 minutes, I saw nothing, because you don't remember at all. You know, I'd seen several before that. But anyway, 2 minutes before I saw nothing, but 1 minute before they were just brilliantly on display. There was like a white sidewalk. So that's one technique if people want to try and use that, just have a reminder that you can quickly glance at.
Okay, I do want to mention again that basically I was just trying to go through some of the basics so that you could capture a decent image. Mike's article in the August issue of Astronomy magazine has more depth in it. The 3 videos that I mentioned that Fred Espinock did for Sky and Telescope, which, you know, they're $30 each, they're excellent, they cover a lot of detail. Kelly Beatty, I think it was, from Sky and Telescope, did a lecture at NIF, which is, or actually it was at a Harvard lecture. It's out on YouTube. It's about an hour long. It's also an excellent material on that. Fred's book over there, Alan Dyer's book. There's some great resources out there. Don't just take what I did. Do some exploration, but the time's short.
Yeah. Other
Anything else?
questions? Well, I think this has been a great session, and thank all the speakers. Thank you, Dan. And with some luck,